It's now my particular pleasure to welcome our first keynote speaker, Professor Michael Xiao Xinhuang is an extraordinary academic with a broad range of interests, touching on everything from Sino-Japanese relations, the rise of China in our region, marital issues and debates and discussions within Taiwan, and also the issues of democratization and the rise and fall of political strongmen and their significance for regional politics. He's also worked broadly not only on Taiwan, but also in Hong Kong and Macau, all areas of great interest, in particular in the last year or so. Although the professor will be speaking today about a topic to do with the rise of the middle class and the new middle class and its impact on the democratization in post-war Taiwan, his broad interests, his vast publishing concerns touch on all of these topics, and I hope during the Q&A, if we may, during the Q&A sessions, colleagues and friends would perhaps like to ask you about some of your other areas of interest as well, because you're so broadly informed and thought so widely on so many of the big topics and issues that so many participants in this conference are concerned with. Professor Xiao is the director of the Institute of Sociology at the Academy of Sinica, an extraordinarily active and important institute. He's also a distinguished research fellow with the Academy and professor of sociology at National Taiwan University and also at the National Sun Yat-sen University. He's also the chair professor of Hakka Studies at the National Central University. He's also had a political career serving as a national policy advisor to the government from 1996 to 2006. So as I said, we're very fortunate to have a colleague here who has not only a vast range of academic interests, but also policy engagement and also engagement with the big issues of the day, all concerns of this centre, a centre that tries to follow not only the questions of international academic concern, but also those of pressing political and social concern for our contemporary world. So Professor Xiao, if I may, welcome you to give the first keynote address and to formally, through this keynote address, formally open this conference. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Director Bami and Ambassador Lee and distinguished guests. I'm very honored to be here, to be the first speaker for this conference. It's my fortune to be the first. Originally was scheduled for Minister Long, then she quit. I didn't quit. I remained. So I'm very pleased to hear that the university, ANU, is 1 year older than me. The university was established in 1947 and was born in 1948. And also I know that ANU has a good relation with National Taiwan and National Sun Yat-sen University. And I also have the fortune to be the faculty there. Especially congratulations to the establishment of the CIW. And I'm very pleased also, on a side note, that you organize this Taiwan views from the South. And just take this advantage to say a few words about propaganda. We are organizing a Taiwan study in the world we call the World Congress of Taiwan Studies. And we held in 2012 in Academy Sinica, the first round of a World Congress. And the second Congress will be held in SOAS, London, in this coming June. So maybe we can call that Taiwan Study View from the North. So please fly to the North, and we will see what the difference or similarity between North and South. But Taiwan, only one Taiwan. Okay, today's topic is, I call it examining the role of a new middle class and the advocacy of civil society in Taiwan's post-war democratization experience. I have three objectives, and I'm sure in the audience there are three kinds of a person who want me to talk about something on Taiwan. One is pure academic, who want to know about the theories What's the role of middle class and civil society and democracy? That's a more broader social science perspective, and I try to presume. The second one is to want to hear more about Taiwan stories, Taiwan democracy stories, so they're historical. So I will share with you what has happened in the last 50 years of Taiwan's democratization experiences. So I try to be a good storyteller to tell you about Taiwan history. The third one is try to actually more like advocacy, how we protect Taiwan democracy once we have won, even though it's infantile and new democracy. So for those advocates, I will try to be on your side as well. So let me get into, I have 30 PowerPoint slides, and I have only 60 minutes. That means what? I have 2 minutes for each PowerPoint. So let's go through that. First, to be theoretical. The current theorizing on the middle class, civil society, democracy link. So there are the triple links. How I try to untangle the three links and see what kind of link we can pursue to look at what middle class, civil society, and democracy in the context in the context of Taiwan. The popular middle class democracy has been very popular, especially all the way back to Positive Link by Aristotle, to Martin Lipset, to Barrington Moore, and all related to middle class has a lot to do. Democracy. So slogan is like this: no middle class, no democracy. The negative link, of course, they talk about during the Nazi German, they are the petty bourgeoisie, the middle class actually are very ultra-conservative, has something to do with the rise of a Nazi. And during the post-war, also too, and the post-US too. And that's what the Cyril Mills even talk about. Cyril Mills talk about, he put down the US new middle class. Actually, he said the middle class is quite easily co-opted and possible demise, cause the demise of democracy. But all in all, we got a positive, negative, or dubious relationship. All in all, the importance of the middle class in modern Western democracy was widely appreciated in the 1960s and still going on. The second is the popular civil society and democracy link, the second link. Again, the positive link by Charles Taylor, Walzer, Cohen, Areto, and Putman. Especially Robert Putman has a famous talk about social capital and association and the democracy making and maintenance. And dubious link, the social capital controversy. That's that you have a social capital doesn't mean you will be interested in promoting public good. You are only interested in your selfish pursuit by engaging in personal social capital. And organized voluntary association controversy as well. Local mafia, the very strong association, but that's civil society, but nothing to do with democracy. So those are dubious links too. And all in all, the role of a civil society has been celebrated in the late 1980s, since the fall of the Soviet Union and the Eastern European communism. So the civil society was an old concept, but the new meaning, especially since the 1980s. And so, especially now in the 80s, the third wave democratization has a lot to do with the rise of a civil society. And so the role of a civil society, such as in the form of an NGO, NPO, or social movement organization, had a lot to do with the making of the third wave democratization. Now, from what I have been observing for the last 2-3 decades in Taiwan's case, I found something missing in the middle class democracy link, civil society democracy link. What was missing? The first missing is the lack of two specificities of what middle class segment who actually have actively participate in which specific civil society organization that have direct relations to the making of democracy. Which middle class were we talking about? And what kind of a civil society we are talking about? Again, at what historical era, at which historical episode of democratization we are referring to the role of a middle class and also the contribution of a civil society organization. So we need to be more specific. And the best way to be more specific in the historical context is to put one country on a map and to look at Taiwan, which I know better. The historical era, historical phases of democratization, are we talking about initial stage, the initial liberalization, or the democratic transition and transformation? Or are we talking about the consolidation phase? Or we're talking about progressive or congressive term after democracy has taken place? Once the electoral politics is in its place, we have a regime change. It's a progressive term or conservative term in the post-democratization phase. So in order to do that, I wanted to spend a few minutes about how do we understand Taiwan's middle class. Let's profile Taiwan's middle class politically. The political propensity of the middle class as a whole. How many middle classes in Taiwan? According to our empirical data, I think the subjective identification about 70%. But this is subjective identification. I am middle class. But you ask, what kind of middle class? Oh, I'm a lower middle class. And then which segment? You know, I'm a professional. Oh, I'm a worker. I'm a white-collar worker. So it's mixed. So 70% is subjective. But we measure by objective in terms of the mode of production, which is more leftist term of classification, or the Weberian term of measuring occupation, income, education, and so on and so forth. Basically, we call about 30%. 30% of middle class in Taiwan. Urban are higher than the rural. Now, we are more interested here is the political characteristics. Consumption is the basic. And we have a study also compared with Taiwan in Asian Pacific. Basically, the Taiwan's middle class are the first generation middle class. They were the product, the social product of the upgrade mobility. Their parents are farmers or working class. They were the they are the first generation class, middle class, especially the new middle class. So there are three. So when we talk about middle class, we are talking about three class segments. One is the old middle class. Oops, sorry, I pushed the wrong one. To me, it's a high tech. Am I right with this? Okay, the old middle class, they basically is entrepreneurial, the middle class, who do business. And here we are not talking about big capitalists. We are not talking about big boss. We are talking about 小老板, or those small, medium entrepreneurs. They are all middle class. The new middle class are the professional managerial class, who are white collar, to be 师字辈, 工程师 engineer, 老师 teachers, 建筑师 architect, 还有什么师？会计师，还有医师，所以我们叫师字辈的都是 new middle class。我们也是 new middle class， 我们是老师。Now the other one is marginal middle class, who are in between the white collar and blue collar. Who are those people? Salesmen or sales lady. And then the typical case is the sales on the insurance, and then who sell the 柜台小姐, the typical marginal middle class. They feel, we did a survey, they strongly feel I am middle class, but their salary is very close to the blue collars. So they are the three segments. So we have to ask ourselves, which middle class we are referring to, when we try to analyze the triple link. The other one is what are the political characteristics? Here is tricky. When we talk about the middle class as a whole, it's one thing. And also another thing is when we're talking about the old middle class, or we're talking about new middle class, or you're talking about marginal middle class in terms of their political inclination or political behaviors or their political orientations. So, but all in all, first let's talk about all in all middle class character. It's dual political inclination. We always found the coexistence of the liberalism. They wanted to change. They think things should be better and can be better because they make better. They are the middle class. They are the first generation middle class. So I'm better than my parents. So I think the society can be better through our effort. On the other hand, they are conservative, all in all, or two, because they want to keep whatever they want, they can. So retain what they have. Also, they're really reluctant to push too far. So in a way, they are 走一步退两步退一步. You know, 1 or 2 feet ahead and 1 foot backward. And then they will watch. They are very watchful. To depend on, is it allowed? It's okay now. You know, if things are okay, no, I'm very courageous. If it is dangerous, then you go first. So this is the kind of a middle class hubris characteristic. But here I wanted to highlight the position. So this is a kind of all in all characteristics. My proposition to look at it, the middle class man, is the specific liberal and progressive element of the new middle class who can be documented to be the major force behind Taiwan's post-war democratization experience. So I have laid out my analytical angle. Not all middle classes. I'm trying to specify the liberal, pro-democratic, progressive new middle class intellectuals who has played a role in Taiwan democracy. Now, second, let's look at the profile characterizing Taiwan civil society activism. How many civil society organizations, CSO, in Taiwan? According to the record, about 40,000. It's not a big number. It's 4万, about 40,000 registered. Registered, I want to emphasize. Peter Berger, my senior colleague of American sociology, he said, what is a civil society organization? Check the yellow page, registered, you know. Under the category association, NGO, NPO, they are the civil society. Yes, we have registered about 40,000. You can look into those civil society organizations in terms of their objectives or the purposes or the goals. And one is service, philanthropic. Second one, advocacy. The third one is community. This is the percentage of distribution are not scientific at all. I haven't done, we fail many times to do the population survey of Taiwan's CSO. They always get 20% return. So that means what? They're active, probably 20%. The other are bubble. The other bubble civil society. But the important thing, 20% make the history. The 80% doesn't matter. You know? And the other one is look at the typology of the organization. The other one is association. It's a membership-based 协会或者叫做社团法人 membership association 协会. The other one is a foundation. It's endowment-based 叫基金会或者叫做财团法人. This is an accurate number. 35,000 is association. 10% there's a record on foundation, about 5,000 foundations. Now, if you look at it, 90% belong to the do good things or do nice things, service, philanthropic. 慈善, 服务型, 福利型, those association and foundations. Of course, the typical one, famous one is 慈济, right? And we have association like a lot, 很多慈善团体, those belong to the service philanthropical. Now, the community one is about 5%, and the advocacy about 5%. Advocacy is what I try to focus. Community 很有名的新港基金会，还有仰山基金会，宜兰新港在嘉义的新港，and among many we try to look at them individually. So we are talking about 40,000. So here is what is my proposition. The features, important. Now, new since 1980s. 75% of the 40,000 foundation association were established after 1980. And that is the era, that is the golden age of 1980s, the rise of free association, even though it was before the martial law. So 80s are the new era for CSO. Second, small, medium in size. They are very humble in finance. They are quite poor. 其实很穷，没什么钱，但是呢 bold and comprehensive in ambition. 志气很大，所以小而美但是志气很大。I look at all this interview with them. They are, well, I want to do this and that, but do you have money? No. How to do it? Raise the money. See, surprisingly, because those are locally initiated. They are locally initiated and funded, not by UN, because since 1971, Taiwan was expelled from UN or withdrew from UN, so we didn't get any penny from UN, UNESCO, or World Bank. See, as you know, the third world, every year, every decade, UN will launch the decade of development, decade of women, decade of children, decade of environment, decade of people. Then all the mushrooming of association emerged just to get the UN money. Taiwan, no money, no penny from the. So it's locally. But if you look at, as I would demonstrate to you, we got everything. We got every CSO, from a children, women, environment, human rights, peace, you name it, we got it. So how to do it? Not by UN funding, not by through intellectual communication. So, and also to respond Taiwan's domestic need. Okay, so from goodwill to reform consciousness, wide range of CSOs, and rise of regional as well as functional networking within Taiwan. So we got a Taipei Association or Taipei Union of a Social Welfare Association. We got a Tai Kaohsiung, so regional association, and also functional, a women association, women foundation, women social movement. They can link together as a networking, and there are also Taiwan's NGOs, NPO are quite global, especially, I just named 3 women issue. Taiwan's the Garden of Eve Foundation, Li Xin, has been very ambitious to reach to the Asian Women's Foundation Association to protect the teen prostitutes and the human trafficking. And Taiwan's Aborigines Association's foundation has been very daring to develop an Asian alliance of Aborigines, the indigenous peoples, and environment. Taiwan is part of very strong no-nuke association alliance in Asia. So in a way, it's quite global reach. And of course, every time Taiwan wanted to join, Taiwan NGO, NPO wanted to go to UN, always blocked. And they say, this is very funny. I found very hypocritic of the UN. This is a UN gathering, and Taiwan's NGO, Taiwan's non-governmental is non-governmental, very clearly. But they all say you are governmental. Very interesting. So sometimes Taiwan's an NGO has to use the members' foreign passport to go into the UN to join the UN gatherings. So it's very ironic, you know, and so it's a global reach. Now, according to our survey too, the most of the foundation association we have surveyed, they all claim they are autonomous. This is a basic principle, the first ingredients to be civil society, to be autonomy, and Taiwan has made it. So we are not part of a government apparatus. We are not under the control of a government. So which now, the survey was by 2000, in year 2000. But advocacy is less. She said, yes, we try to be advocate on this issue and that issue. And also from after the 1980, we also see some service philanthropic association, foundation has become more vocal, that become more daring to tackle, to criticize the policies. And some advocacy social movement organization in the 1980s, especially after the martial law, they also become more service-oriented. I want to do some good thing, nice thing too. If you look at this one, service philanthropic, basically all these 36,000 organizations, I try very hard to do nice, to do nice things, and advocacy to do critical things, and community to do good things to the community, from educating, cultural activities, set up a library, and help the needed elderly in the community, and so on and so forth. So they both are very important, to do good things, to do nice things, and to do critical things. And Taiwan has all. Okay, now, my proposition, how we look at this. This is good to have a separate lecture about civil society. Many stories can be told. I'm editing the 2 volumes of called Taiwan's third sector history, or the history of Taiwan third sector. We also include several advocacy NGOs and community NGOs and service NGO, and to ask them to write their histories. So the first volume about 14 NGOs, and the second volume it has 11 NGOs. So we have 25 histories of NGOs and civil society, and they all came out very interesting. The history, I think, is representing of Taiwan, grassrooted, democratic in nature. My proposition in this talk is this. It is the advocacy civil society organization that have been documented to be the primary force to push for Taiwan democratic transition in the post-war era. So I will not look at the service philanthropic nor the community one. I will focus on the advocacy one, because my reading of the civil society organization is the advocacy civil society has played a role in Taiwan's democratization. Okay, the third one is how we periodizing Taiwan's 5 decades of democratization. I will look from the talk to follow. The first is the beginning of the intellectual ferment, 1960. We will start with 1960, and that's coincide with the photo exhibit, 1950s, 60s. Of course, there's no civil society there, but there's society there. The second is a cultural identity awareness and the political criticism and the rise of a Dangwai political force in 1970s. The third phase is the social protest movement and the establishment of the first opposition party, DPP. That was the 1980s. And also the political constitutional reform and the sustained support from civil society in 1990s. And the first democratic regime change under DPP, 2000 and 2008. And then number 6, we will also examine during the phase they call conservative turn in post-democratization period under KMT 2008 and 2014, and what civil society and also the critical new middle class element has played the role in the 6 phases of democratization experiences. Okay, let's look at this. This is all the material gathered from various sources by historian, by the archive. You are familiar with those names, but you sometimes might forget it. But let's look at the 1960s. They are not necessarily from the first generation middle class, but they are the middle class. They are the intellectuals, reform-minded intellectuals in the 60s. And some of them are Mainlanders. Okay, let's look at this one. 1960. 那时候自由中国，公论报 The name 雷震、李万居、自由中国 and 公论报 that advocating freedom of forming opposition party. They're already demanding for the freedom to establish a opposition party. And then 1957 to 1965, 文心杂志. Those are my high school era, my high school period to read those magazines, Enlightenment. So I still remember when I was a first year in college, I traced back the old issue. They even introduced the Taco Parsons, you know. So very interesting, of course, satire and feminism, you know. So this has an interesting enlightenment among the youngsters. In Taiwan, I remember back in the university, first year, I attended several his lectures. Liao at that time. And then 1964 is very, very important, this one. I wanted to highlight this one, 台湾人民自救运动, the Self-Rescue Declaration of Taiwan. One China, one Taiwan. New constitution, protection of a human right, democratic political system, rejoin the UN. And that time, look at the demographic number, 1,200万. So that was the first time in 1964, 1,200万人决定台湾前途. 12 million Taiwanese, the people decide the future of Taiwan. And you will look at later, I also tried to trace 1,700万 and then 2,300万, you know. So this mission had never achieved, not yet. Peng, that's Professor Peng and his 2 students. And I think last year they celebrate or commemorate the 50 years of the declaration. And they have a seminar conference there. It was a very daring, 1964. Huh? So let's not forget, democracy could and can be started very early. It did not succeed, doesn't mean it was not there. We have to really pay the tribute to the history of democracy. And rise of Dangwai, 1969, outside the KMT party. The Dangwai is a very creative term because you cannot have a new party. So therefore, I am outside the party. So it's just 那个时候的 the origin of 党外就是我不是党内. I think very interesting. They team up together to attract thousands of supporters in the campaign rally, a very significant social and political phenomenon under martial law. 69, of course, under martial law and political reform, consciousness raising. And 党外民主运动的兴起, and then elections. And those people are, some are still alive. Huang Xinjie already died. Kang Lingxiang just published his memoir with 700 pages, I think. Huang Tianfu, and 党外一词的出现. So the 60s, almost forgotten, but I think we have to renew our memories. And now 70s, again. Here, remember, I'm not highlighting individuals, but again, in 1960s, the significance of individuals, but let's not forget, they all have journals, magazines, newspapers, intellectuals. So, 文人造反就是写文章. So I think at that time you can see in Taiwan, not just individual cry out loud in the street. They write papers, they write columns, they use newspapers. And And then that tradition continues in the 70s. 有大学杂志, the intellectual magazine. You see the names are liberals. The liberal 陈谷应, 张俊宏, 陈少廷, 邱宏达, 吴佛, 杨国书, 王小波, among others. And we can document the names. And also 1975, and then 大学杂志 stopped, and then Taiwan 政论 show-lived only 5 issues. The Political Review magazine, again by some of the overlap one, but still, 黄信介、康宁祥、张俊宏、姚嘉文、张金策、黄华、邱垂亮、郭雨欣。邱垂亮 is in Queensland. And then the Taiwan Political Review, criticism of authoritarian system. And then 乡土文学运动. Most of only literary people are, but as a social scientist, I think it's very important to place the 乡土文学运动 and the 民歌运动 in the social movement, because there was a sort of a first time to bring Taiwan society, culture into our mindset. You say, this is our land. We should respect, we should love. And so the 乡土文学运动, at that time, if you look at our document, they say, all the novels. I remember I worked with Bo Yang, very senior, he died already. At one time in late 80 or 90, we in the seminar, and we document, we look at all the popular, the bestsellers in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And none of the book, none of the novel has anything to do with Taiwan. Either is 再见中旅 in California, the 留学生, or 张艾嘉 Shanghai, or 王兰的星星月亮太阳在重庆还是北京啊，要不然就是博洋自己的在打剿匪，在应该在金三角。There's no Taiwan, but we read all the time, but nothing to do with Taiwan. So that's why 乡土文学运动 they say we should have a novel, we should have a literature of Taiwan, about Taiwan. So that's why 乡土文学运动 started. Of course, it was a debate by conservative writers say this is 狼来了 and then 这个是灰色文学，这个是共产党文学，这是左翼文学。But the battle was over in the late 70s. The social realism of literature was established ever since. And then because of 乡土文学, then we can see the 新电影, the new movies. Sayonara 再见, 还有嫁妆一流车, 还有这个杨清处的 Working Man 工厂人系列. So that we can that all the movie is about Taiwan. And then song, the guitar and very simple melodies. They were singing 外婆的澎湖湾, nothing to do with 我爱你你爱我，然后美酒加咖啡，或者是咖啡加美酒，或者是负心的人姚淑蓉等等。But that is simple social life. So this, I think, to me, is a very important sort of another kind of enlightenment. It's not foreign enlightenment, it's local. See, locality, the local culture need to brought in to enlighten us, to remind us, this is our land, this is our people, this is our culture, this is our history. So through novels, through 散文, 小说, and movies. So that's why 80s and 90s, the 新电影 caught a lot of attentions. Okay, now in 1977, here again, that's another Presbyterian church, very significant. I will weight it, very important. Taiwan Presbyterian Church issued Human Rights Declaration, call for making Taiwan a new and independent country to face increasing threat of annexation from PRC. And then slogan was, again, in how many years? 13 years, our population increased by 5 million. So 5 more million to decide his own fate. 1700万人决定台湾前途these are the ministers. So it's important to look at this as well. And then 1979, very important thing, I think all of us still remember this Formosa incidents. And before that, in 1977, the Zhongli事件, because the election irregularity in Zhongli, they were blocked the police station, and that Xu Xinliang ran for magistrate of Taoyuan. See, so okay, this is a human right. This was a human right rally, and again during the rally, that's called the Kaohsiung 事件. And here I want to focus on this. They even the Dang Wai, and that in 1970, in that year, very important. Besides these Formosa incidents, besides the Zhongli 事件. Also that time the Dang Wai Dang Wai Alliance become active. They even organized the Dang Wai National Affair Conference, Dang Wai 国事会议. And they also call for the determination of Taiwan future by the Taiwanese, that everyone living in Taiwan is Taiwanese, to determine our own future. And then important, this Dang Wai, this is here I didn't put a name. We call 美丽岛世代 or Formosa generations. They are in their late 60s or early 70s. They are. And then more important is because of the Formosa incident, there are another new defending lawyer generation. 陈水扁、谢长廷、尤清、江鹏坚、苏贞昌、张俊雄、李胜雄 and 郭继仁 and among others, so on so. They are defense lawyers, and they still play active role even in today's Taiwan's politics. So here again, so far by the 1980s, all the names on the list are the liberal intellectuals, 师字辈的人, lawyers, professors, intellectuals. So that's why, but they are not necessarily reflecting the so-called new middle class out of the 1980s. That's looking into the 1980s. As a sociologist who has been working on Taiwan's social movement, I have paid a very close attention on Taiwan's social movement since the 1980s. I went back to Taiwan after my graduate study in 1979. So I have it as a witness of Taiwan's social movement. Now let's look at the first, I call the first wave, that between 1980s to 1986. Let's remind you, this is still under the martial law. The first important rise of the Consumer Foundation, 1980s, November 1st, Consumer Foundation of Taiwan. And the key members are architects, lawyers, accountants, professors, and those are the people. They are typical. So in 1980s, we can see as you follow my analysis, you will see most of the key persons are really what we categorize the advocates, reform, new middle classes elements. The second one is the anti-pollution protest movement in various localities due to the pollution problems. So in very locality, they have a self-help anti-pollution association. And it's the old social fabric also play a very important role to support the victims. So it's a typical victims movement. And this one, Consumer Foundation, basically is an agent movement. They are the people who actually can escape from the environmental problem, but they are the middle class who advocates for the consumer right. And I was one of the members in the establishment of the Consumer Foundation. And then in 1982, the nature conservation movement, they call Wildlife Nature Conservation Union. And here I want to remind you that this is 1980 to 86 established, but you can see it continued. So you can see the movement is still going on. until today. They have more organization established. So I would say the initiation was in 1980s. And then women's movement, 妇女新知, the Awakening Foundation. And then the Aboriginal Human Rights Movement, 台湾原住民促进会, Aborigines Human Rights Advancement Advancement Association, and the student movement 1986 started with National Taiwan University. The student leaders, the student union, they demand for direct election. Before that time, the student union, the president of the student union was indirectly elected. So they demand, first, very simple, they just want direct election of the NSTAR of National Taiwan University. And later you will see, in 1990s, they walk outside the wall of the university to demand for the abolishment of the National Assembly in 4 years. Now students are the reserve army of the future new middle class. So I will put them together here too. And then the student movement, and then this one, the New Testament church protest, they're demanding for the freedom, religious freedom, and 新约教会, and then the student movement, and then they promoted to the 大学改革促进会. And then here, in 1986, September 28, the establishment of DPP. It's illegally established. And here the name you can see. So don't just look at the association, they are individuals. The component, most of so far, except this one, the victim associations are the local residents across different classes, rural, farmers, workers, local residents. But again, even this one, anti-pollution protest movement, received a lot of support from a new middle class journalists who came there, and the students, university students, and then professors, and who supported, write article to support the anti-pollution movement. And you can see all that. And then this one, Aboriginal Human Rights Association, are the young intellectuals, Aborigines intellectuals who study in Taipei, and they work in Taipei, and they feel their culture has been lost. So they kind of self-awareness to do, and so they all belong to the new middle classes. Let's look at wave 2. That's in that year. If I'm a historian, I really wanted to look at it 1987, the year, from January 1st to December 31st. I think that somebody wrote 万历31年, I think, by a historian. I think 1987 was the social scientist, was a very interesting year. Just before the lift of martial law and right after the lift of martial law. And here I want to put it before 1987, what happened in 1986. DPP was established illegally. Secondly, Jiang Jingguo, during his meeting with Mrs. Grant, Martha Grant, I think Margaret Grant, the publisher of the Catherine Grant, and he said, we are about to lift the martial law. And also during the 中常会, he talked about 三变, 3 changes. 环境在变, 时代在变, 社会在变, 所以国民党也要变. So he gave the signal that martial law will be lifted. Now, what made him to do that? I think, of course, the rise of opposition, and he decided not to expel, not to suppress the DPP. He has his own reason, which I think is a smart idea. And I knew during the time in the late 86, a lot of conservatives still, you should crack down the DPP, but he decided not to. And also, so I think what he has seen is the Taiwan society has changed and make him change too. So I think that's why it's a link between, so here, I think it's important, I put here the lift of martial law, 87. But here, during the year, we got the labor movement, 87. The first strike was by 远东纺织公司, 远纺, and the 劳资会 This is a working class or union. But this Lao Zi Hui, now they changed to a new name called Labor Front. Very important, are lawyers, labor lawyers, professors who study law, who study labor issues. And then Farmers Association 87, Teachers Human Rights Movement, 教师人权促进会, the Handicapped and Disadvantaged Welfare Protest Movement, 残障联盟, Handicapped Union, and also established 老人福利联盟, Elderly Welfare Alliance. And the legendary figure was Liu Xia, a female handicapped poet and writer, Xing Lingzi, that's her pen name, right name. And then political prisoners, human rights movement, and the Truth for 228 Incident Movement, 87, Taiwan 人权促进会, Taiwan Human Rights Association. And then here it's interesting, Mandarin Home Visiting Movement, 外省人返乡促进会, very interesting, 何文章. Every time the rally during the early 80s, he always went to the rally and wear the white cape and say, 少小离家老大还, 返乡有罪吗? Very touching, very touching. And then veterans benefit protest, 老兵福利运动, basically to demand to cash in the 受田证, then deed. Cashing in. But the days the government decided to cash in, but with a high cost. If the first time in 1987 was cashing much cheaper, and later postpone the time, more price go up, so I demand more. So it's interesting. There also the 郑南榕自焚 and that's demonstration for freedom of speech and Taiwan independence. That's again that act. To tell the truth, inspired quite a few Taiwanese who has a strong independent mind, but not well documented. So it's very, very nice. So that year, again, all those people very much either cross class or the primary supporter are the intellectual, liberal intellectual, lawyers, and so on and so forth. Now let's look at the 1978, and then and then in 1988 to the third wave, we have the following movement: education reform movement, 人本基金会 and 教改联盟, and also blacklist Taiwanese home returning movement, 黑名单台湾人返乡促进会 and political prisoners human rights association, and the Hakka ethnic language and cultural movement, the anti-nuclear movement, the non-homeowner, they call 无壳蜗牛, the non-homeowner who can afford to buy a new home due to the escalating of the real estate price. And then just last year, during the election, they hold from a non-share movement, they called having a nest movement. 有巢, they wanted to demand a nest. And so that is again another one. And judicial reform movement, very much so by civic judicial reform movement, by lawyers and so on and so forth. And to journalist autonomy movement, and then Wild Lotus, 1990s, a very famous one, Wild Lily. And the intellectual anti-military interference in politics demonstration, 1990s. And that time was because the President Li Denghui nominated Hao Bo-chun is to be the prime minister. So many professor intellectuals are sitting in front of the Xingongyuan in the 博物馆. So this one, they left the martial law and during the Li Denghui lived on ban on press and also lived on ban on political parties. So you can see in historical sequence, government responded to the demand from the new middle classes, join in these civic organizations, pro-democracy civil society organizations. Let's look at the 1990s. The political and constitutional reform and the sustained support from a civil society. I think I have to go. I think my time is, I have to go fast. 1991, liberal professors and collectively withdrew their KMT party membership. There are 28 professors. And then this is important to anti-nuclear, the first big rally, and also this one is also important, Action 100 Alliance, to the abolishment of Article 100 of the Criminal Code of Freedom of Speech. Those are professors. Taiwan Professor Union, quite important, and has been play a very important role. And then Yizhong Yitai, and plus the He, led by Lin Yixiong. Okay. And going on in 1994, the Educational Reform March by Taiwan NTU mathematics professor Huang Wuxiong. And then the 1994, the Taiwan 新闻记者协会, the Taiwan Journalist Association was established. And also demand for the internal freedom of press and professionalism. And then there's a social legislation articulation by many social welfare associations. And then the rally, Say No to China rally, led by Presbyterian Church and many social movement organizations. And then during the mid-1990s and onward, all the social movement, advocacy, civil society has four terms. One is go to community more, and then to professional. They demand the professional reform within medical profession, within journalists, within service sector, and so on. And then networking, going to netizen movement, and then peripheral, going to outside of Taipei. Okay, then we go into the 2000 and 2008. Advocacy civil society, that's the first regime change. Advocacy civil society organization and activists under the first regime change under DPP, 2000 and 2004, they were the formal allies. And the first 2 years was a honeymoon period, wait and see. And then later become very disappointment on the part of advocacy civil society organization, especially in labor, welfare, and environment. And they even criticized the DPP government for betraying their promises and moral integrity. And also, the civil society organization was very upset about the DPP's inaction on the transitional justice. And so the authoritarian legacy remained during the time. And civil society organization for the second term, for the DPP second term, little achievement were made on significant reform agenda as opposition KMT blocked nearly all reform initiative in LY. DPP administration failed to break and political deadlock. DPP government even took a rather conservative position in facing political oppositions. So the civil society, the new middle class, and the DPP developed a kind of a love and hate feeling. And by the end election, they might still cast a vote for DPP. But before, and they were very upset and frustrated. And activists and advocates for many social movements even criticize DPP, as I mentioned, betrayal of moral commitment and campaign promises. But I still want to say that during the 8 years, the procedure of democratic consolidation and deepening, such as the protest of a freedom of speech and association, were still safeguarded between 2000 and 2008. But no progressive reform was ever initiated. A sense of a collective anger from a civil society activists at this scandalous misconduct of a Chen family. Just for your information, Chen Shui-bian was released yesterday afternoon for a medical parole for 1 month. And DPP government did try again in its later years the necessary public trust and support in promoting and enacting reform much desired and sought by the social movement, but all came too late to save its political survival in 2008 presidential election. Interesting, odd enough to note that the KMT remained conservative and even reactionary to many of the civil society progressive call for social and political reform during its entire 8 years period of opposition. That was the first time for KMT to be in the opposition. But according to a mature democratic system, opposition is supposed to develop a kind of a coalition and alliance with the civil society organization. But at that 8 years, very little or near to zero. There's no coalition, alliance between the civil society organization, social movement, you name it. I remember only one time that the KMT supported social movement was the Farmers Association's protest against the reform of the Farmer Association, because the government at that time wanted to sort of reform the 信用部, the credit department, because the credit department would become sales, credit, and so they want to crack down this one. But DPP support that they should keep the 信用部. That was the first time, and I have an interview with the environmental group, labor group, and welfare group, and they told me they have a hard time in developing any constructive relations with the KMT at that time, the foundations then. They say we don't have a trust between us. I think DPP doesn't like the social movement, and social movement leaders doesn't like KMT either. So this is what happened. No mutual trust was restored or developed between the two former rivals. So you can see civil society, the advocacy civil society, tried very hard to be independent. They criticized DPP for being betrayal to their campaign promises, a moral judgment, moral commitment. They also still consider KMT has no position to initiate any reform. So what happened after 2008? Civil society organization in 2008, under the second regime change under the KMT regained rule, further frustrated and resentful toward Ma's right-wing neo-authoritarian rule for his conservative policies. Ma administration was criticized by civil society organization for its neoliberal economic and social policy by legalizing casinos, trimming the national pension system, and acquiring farmland for industrial protests during the past few years, insisting on nuclear energy development policy, and also quite regressive on various general environmental costs. And so therefore, what happened? Many new, I would call it a resurrection of a civil society movement and activists in 2008 and 2014, new movement in the rise. CCW, there was a new in 2007, it's called Citizen Congress Watch, was established, and by 30 social movement organizations, an encouragement move in democratic consolidation, a remobilization on the march again of more than 10 key social movement organizations beginning in late 2008. So right after the KMT regained its power, the social movement reassembled again. They found their energies again, somehow. The resilience of a pro-democracy spirit of the progressive civil society movement somehow still alive. And here is 2008, you can see another one called Wild Lily, Wild Strawberry, 野草莓. And there was a student and youngsters protest against the visit of Chen Minling So many civil society organizations, they think it's improper for the government to stage the unproportionally protection of the China envoy, and even told the public not to hang the national flag near the hotel of Yuanshan Fandian. They think is not right. And also, in 2013, again, you know, the white shirt rally, Baishan Jun, they were protested by led by the Citizen 1985, September 2013, to protest against the torture death of the young soldier, Hong Zhongqiu, in the army camp. And then you can see more, the Taiwan Rural Fund, Taiwan Nongchun Zhenxian, to protest and to protect Taiwan's farmers and livelihood and also the land. And the Citizen Alliance for Monitoring Cross-Strait cross-strait negotiation and agreement to safeguard Taiwan's national interest and national integrity, targeting China's dominance, and Taiwan Democracy Watch, Taiwan 民主平台, that's another new intellectual organization, to safeguard to Taiwan's democratic system from collapse and to facilitate Taiwan democratic consolidation, targeting China's interference. So again, later part from internal to external, from Taiwan democratization and also to save Taiwan democratization. Even though Taiwan democratization only very short period of time. And then we go to, you are familiar with Fan Yiba, 318. Here I'll read it. 318, Sunflower Civic Movement. I deliberated not to call it student movement, as I will explain to you later. March 18, it was an Occupy legislative yuan to rescue Taiwan's democracy and protect Taiwan's national interest and integrity in the face of China's political threat and economic pressure targeting at China's influence. 318 Sunflower Civic Movement demonstrated the effectiveness of the further mobilization of all advocacy-oriented civil society organizations to join and to sustain the movement, and I'll explain why. The student was inside the LY, but important thing is outside for that March 18 to April 10, day and night. There are many, many citizens. Most of them are middle classes, parents, young generations who work all day and then went there to support, wandering around to show their support by being there. And the more important thing is a lot of them are the first timer on the street. They were touched by those students. And then, important in the context of my talk, the core civil society organization. There are many organizations I named already in the previous slides. They were there, stationed there to support the student, to safeguard the student, to protest, to protect the students inside the LY. And they even organize, give consultations, or even provide spaces or financial support, or get some money to support the student. Which are those organizations? Taiwan Association of University Professors, 教授联盟, Awakening Foundation, 妇女新知, Taiwan Association for Human Rights, 台湾人权协会, Citizen Congress Watch, CCW, 公都盟, Taiwan Labor Fund, 劳政, Taiwan Rural Fund, 台湾农政, Earth Citizen Foundation, 公民 地球公民基金会 and Citizen 1985, led mainly by medical doctors and experts in communications. And then Green Citizen Action Alliance, Taiwan Democracy Watch, Taiwan Alliance for Advancement of Youth Rights, 青少年联盟, and Black Island Youth, 黑岛青. The peripheral CSOS also involve Alliance for Referendum, 公投盟, Taiwan International Workers Association, 国际劳工协会, 劳具协会, Taiwan Alliance for the Victim of Urban Renewal, 都市更新受害者协会, Alliance for Workers of Closed Factory, 关厂联盟受害劳工, Wing of Radical Politics. And those are by a young sociologist who has been observing during the days and to document, and Albert Zinn. So that's why it's not the student movement alone, but the key member, yes, the student movement who initiated, but even before March 18, they were consulted by some liberal intellectuals, critical intellectuals. So these are we can look at it, 60, 70, 80, 90, you had a real name, you got a real organizations. So let's come to my conclusions. I think time is pretty much closed. Clarification. There are real pro-democracy individuals, such as liberal intellectuals and activists, and organizations in civil society have been indispensable in the democracy-making history of Taiwan over the past 5 decades. Number 2, the history of making democracy in Taiwan is full of struggles, confrontations, and contentions between the democratic force in the civil society and the political opposition on the other hand, and the conservative KMT on the other. 30 years ago was like that. 30 years later, still still on the confrontational side. Number 3, with or without proper or conducive political opportunities, the liberal intellectuals, 60s, 70s, and advocacy social movement since 1980s, and the political opposition have constituted the driving force and change agent behind the 5-decade history of democratic struggles, either to push for democratization during 1960 and 2000, and to rescue the democracy in the face of a China pressure. That's in 2008 and 2014. Number 4, Taiwan experience in democratization over the past 5 decades confirms the positive link among middle class, civil society, and democracy making. Number 5, Taiwan's case also highlights the critical issue of examining, we have to examine the specificity of the middle classes and the civil society organization at the different historical juncture of the politics of democratic struggles. Number 6, this is important. Taiwan experience also has further demonstrated that the progressive new middle class individuals and groups has initiated or involved in advocacy and social movement-oriented civil society organization needed to, 1, to push collectively for initial liberalization, and they might end up in jail. 2, safeguard the necessary democratic transition since 1980s, and to deepen democratic consolidation in the 1990s, and even to protect and to rescue the new democratic from falling into the conservative authoritarian setback, and finally, to prevent the external authoritarian China factor from distorting Taiwan's democratic future. Therefore, number 7, the last clarification, the plausible link as seen in Taiwan's case can be understood in the following. Progressive new middle class, having taken part in advocacy pro-democracy civil society organization, having then actively engaged in various phases of a democracy, either in initiation, transition, consolidation, or even rescuing of democracy in Taiwan in the past 50 years. Lessons, only 3. Number 1, simply to have a large number of rising upward affluent new middle class or middle class will not be enough to secure democratization. It is necessary to have adequate, I only say adequate number of liberal and progressive new middle class intellectuals and professors and professionals to envision the prospect of democracy either under authoritarian or during democratization process. Number two, again, simply having a sizable, ordinary, non-governmental civic organization may not be sufficient, won't do the job. It is required to have adequate number, adequate number of diverse advocacy and pro-democracy social movement organizations to exert pressures collectively again on the authoritarian regime for progressive change to take place. Last, moreover, it is necessary to have the presence of any effective political opposition party to challenge directly the authoritarian rule so that the progressive middle class can give their political support, while the advocacy civil society organization can further develop or forge a strategic democratic coalition with it through post-democratization electoral political process. So, thank you very much.